welcome everybody to today's session of Vantage Point. Boy, if that drum music didn't get your heart pumping, I don't know. I don't know what will. So we're going to talk today about continuous growth, how driving employee engagement with effective performance management really enhances your culture. And of course, we're sponsored by Vantage Circle, our wonderful sponsors. So today we're going to share insights on how to create an environment where leadership and team members can do their best work. And with me, as always, is my co-author, my cohort in crime, my best friend, Adrian Gostick.
You're Batman to your Robin, Chester. I am thrilled to be here today with you and our amazing guest. Let me introduce our guest. Stephane Charbonnier is the CHRO of L'Oreal USA. He's got 25 years of experience managing large-scale changes and helping organizations achieve business growth, including his work at Towers Watson and PepsiCo. His passion is around attracting and developing talent for his organization. And Davis Gotte is Vice President, Global Talent Management for Bumble, and previously served in senior global HR roles for Ecolab and General Mills. At Bumble, her role comprises talent and organizational development, diversity, inclusion, engagement, talent acquisition, and contingent workforce management. And we also have our good friend Dorie Clark, who is ranked as the #1 communication coach in the world. She's a thought leader and business professor at Duke University and has been named one of the top business thinkers in the world by Thinkers 50. She's also the Wall Street Journal bestselling author of The Long Game, Entrepreneurial You, and Standout. So we're thrilled to have you all on the panel today. We're going to start with Anne. So first off, we have people joining us. This is mostly a session designed for HR, but we have different leaders joining us. And so we throw out some terms sometimes like performance management, and maybe we don't really understand what's all encompassing in that term. So maybe you could help us understand what is performance management and what does effective performance management look like?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. Fundamentally, performance management is about systems, practices, and individual behaviors that enable all of us to give our best at work at the individual and team and organizational level. And that can sound heady and conceptual, but at its simplest terms, when it's going well and when it is effective, it really does 4 things. First, as an employee, I understand what I'm expected to do and I know why it's important. Second, I know what skills and behaviors I need to either demonstrate or develop in order to meet those expectations. Third, I feel confident as an employee that I'm going to get the coaching and support that I need along the way. And finally, I believe that my work will be fairly viewed and acknowledged through rewards or other opportunities. And that's ultimately what we strive to do with strong performance management.
Stephane at L'Oreal, what would you add?
So I would start by saying that my bottom line regarding performance management is that companies have to evolve from judging their employees once a year to hearing them all year long. And the reason why I'm saying that is because for so many years, and I'm sure I'm looking at Anne, I'm looking at Dorie, and hopefully all the people on this call can relate to that. We've been running those performance management cycle and processes that people both on the employee side and manager side have dreaded, to be honest, because in the best case scenario, you would meet at the beginning of the year and then potentially at mid-year and then at year end, and everybody was getting ready for those moments and trying to pull all of the information. And for me, the best analogy I heard about that was like, when you're at the restaurant, you're getting at the end of the meal, and suddenly the waiter is being nice to you just before getting the check to you. And so the truth is, it drove a lot of frustrations on both sides. And for me, for many years, performance management and engagement were actually conflicting notions. So I think the way certainly we think about it at L'Oreal is more now around meaningful conversation on an ongoing basis. And Anne said it very well, having clarity about what do I need to do and what do I need to deliver, but also feel that I have the ongoing support and resources from both the organization and my manager. That's for us, certainly at L'Oreal, what we think about effective performance management.
I love that idea of meaningful conversations on an ongoing basis versus, once or even twice a year. So, Dorie, what are you seeing with your clients and in your work? Are you seeing this evolve?
Yeah, absolutely, Adrian. One of the things that I have noticed in terms of the work that I do with clients and seeing the patterns of how things have evolved over the past couple of years post pandemic, and as we're sort of question mark post pandemic figuring everything out, is that in so many cases the good managers, the good leaders, they have been doing things all along that were terrific, but prior to the pandemic, the average or not good leaders really could kind of skate a little bit. They could get away with suboptimal leadership behaviors just because the sort of shared culture of being together in an office and people picking things up by osmosis, that would kind of sort of take care of itself and it would paper over a lot of problems. What the pandemic has shined a light on now, especially now that we're hybrid or remote, and especially now that so many people, as you guys have written so well about, are experiencing anxiety at work and in their life circumstances, what we're seeing is that everybody is having to step things up, because if we don't, the balance of power has really shifted to workers, at least for the time being. And we have to be a lot more thoughtful about making sure that we actually are consciously creating culture, that we actually consciously are making choices about leadership rather than assuming that things will take care of themselves.
It's so interesting that you point out this constant evolution. And, we go through these big changes, pandemic, social unrest, whatever it might be. And all of a sudden there's this reflection. Hey, has the way we've been doing it for so long makes any sense anymore? Right. And so the good leaders and the good companies and organizations, they make those adjustments. I think one of the questions, and I'm going to start with Stephane on this. And by the way, before we get to the next area of discussion, Adrian got to welcome you. I got to tell you, Anne, Dorie, and Stephane, you are three of one of the most delightful people I know. And so I can't tell you how grateful I am that you're giving us your time. It really is part of your nature to be givers. And I really appreciate that. But Stephane, as we talk about, methods and stuff, if somebody wanted to start putting together a really good system, where their voices are heard. Talk about how you do it at L'Oreal and maybe a few tips on how people can build their own really effective programs when it comes to performance and evaluation.
Especially how you measure
it.
Yeah.
The way you measure, we measure at L'Oreal, the effectiveness of performance management is you can look at foundational quantitative metrics such as, the percentage of goals that are set in your system. You can also use a number of AI tools today that can tell you based on the content, what is the quality and the direct connection to the objective from an enterprise standpoint. But for me, as importantly or even more importantly, is to measure the outcome and to measure the way employees and people feel about their goal and feel about how clear I am about what's expected from me, how clear and empowered I am. And we just actually received our latest pulse results actually last week. And what was super interesting to see in our data is that 86% at an enterprise level of our employees said that they feel they have clarity about what they have to do and they know what they have to do to perform at their best. And that, for me, those are the measure that you're looking for to understand if your organization is clear and aligned behind the frame and know what they have to deliver.
Isn't that interesting when you talk about how people feel? That's getting to be more and more important. Am I comfortable with my goals? Am I comfortable with my resources? And you talked about, do I have the tools to really deliver on what I'm asked to do? So let me throw it to you, Anne. What would you add to that measurement piece?
Well, I think the fact that Stephane went to sentiment and to the measurers is an important part of the question. I think once upon a time we judged performance management in a very narrow way, and the people who got to discern its effectiveness was a small group, and the people who had to contribute to those measurements were a broad group. And I think that Stephane's point is now that the agency for performance management's effectiveness belongs to all of us. By asking people how they're feeling about the process, is it working for me? We're changing the sentiment or the approach from top down, this is something that is imposed and evaluated, right? Versus this is something that we own together. And our goal here is to make all of us better, So how is it going really? And being able to adjust based on that is such an important shift. And it sounds like L'Oreal's really doing some incredible work there. That to me is the most important thing. It's not just the interest in what we see qualitatively. It's the fact that we're asking a very different group of people who are participants in this process to become more active and engaged in this process itself and to help us shape it, really. And that's what I think is so powerful about his point.
Your background, you came from really like big companies, General Mills and Ecolab and so on, and now you're in a smaller startup. Is it easier for smaller companies to make that shift, or were you seeing that evolution in the bigger companies where you worked before you got to Bumble?
It's such a great question. I think that it's possible and difficult in big companies and small companies for different reasons. So in big companies, as Stephane and Dorie and others can certainly share, change just takes a little longer. Getting alignment is a little trickier. You're moving kind of a great big ship liner. In smaller companies, often you can run decisions through more quickly, but what you're getting instead as barriers are capability, maturity, and coordination. So littler companies haven't necessarily always figured out, how do you work cross-functionally? What does shared goal setting look like? How do we collaborate? Are we calibrated on our point of view on leadership and behaviors and what good looks like? And what are the most important bodies of work to get done? Bigger companies have been doing that a little longer. And so I think that the challenges are different. I think that small or big, we have an opportunity to rise to those challenges and be really thoughtful about addressing them. But I don't know that one's easier than the other. It's been fun to sort of learn in this new environment because it's taught me that there are just different trade-offs and different things to navigate.
That's really interesting. So, Dorie, any thoughts?
Absolutely. So when it comes to performance management, I mean, of course, we know that every company wants to hire the best people. We all want the team of A players, A+ players. But frankly, it does get harder as you become a larger organization. First of all, because you, as the leader, are not necessarily doing all of the hiring. You have to trust that the people that you've hired to do the hiring know what you want and are able to find good people. Also, if you run a sort of small, whether it's a startup or a purpose-driven organization, sometimes you can get really high quality people just based on a sense of mission or based on a sense of personal chemistry. And so as organizations get larger, though, that gets a little harder to pull off. And so one of the things that I like to think about is the work of some colleagues that I admire, Frances Fry and Anne Morris. And they've done a lot of work talking about the service industry in particular. And this could be everything from, fast food restaurants to banks to airlines. And what they say is that we've got to be incredibly thoughtful about the systems that we put in place, because the systems need to be designed for average performers, not superstar performers. And I think that's a systemic mistake that we continue to make. Again, of course, we want all of our people to be superstar performers. That's what we're striving for. But if we need to be realistic in our minds, we actually have to say, at scale, systems trump individuals. A great individual performer can overcome a bad system, but most people are going to be average. And so we need to have a great system in place to be able to optimize the work that they do.
Yeah, I love that insight, because we tend to say, okay, everybody's got to be a superstar. You go, well, everybody's not a superstar. I want to come back to you, Stephane, just for a minute, because L'Oreal is this international company, right? When you're looking for measurement, and as Dorie's talking about systems and how you create it, do you need to be especially sensitive to cultural differences? Is it different in France and Germany than it is in Ohio?
It is certainly how people react to your systems and ways of being looked at, and so we take that into account. The way we build our HR processes in two ways. The first one is we have a global collaboration across defining a process. So it's not somebody in our headquarters in Paris who's going to decide this is what we're going to do for the world. We have a sort of a multifaceted, multi-centered type of center of expertise that help. And the US being the largest country for L'Oréal in the world, we have a big share of voice in that. The second is also we have a test and learn mindset. So for us in the US, as an example, we piloted the ongoing conversation and meaningful conversation I was mentioning. So we moved from the traditional performance management process to now, at least a quarterly ongoing conversation on where are you, what do you need, how do I support? And the US were actually a pilot for the group. So we harnessed the learnings and then we shared it back with the group. And now we have a very aligned type of approach that is endorsed no matter where you sit in the world. And that's the way L'Oréal likes to proceed, which is even though we're a large organization, we like to have that test and learn mentality, if that makes sense.
It does. No, thanks, Stephane. That's wonderful to understand that. One of the things we're seeing with performance management is this idea of mental health and wellness coming in that, 5 years ago, we wouldn't have even thought about this. Most organizations, if there's a silver lining to the pandemic, it's that we've started thinking more about people's mental health. So I'm curious, let's start with you, Dorie. How does mental health and wellness fit into effective performance management? Are there different ways of thinking that organizations should be considering right now?
Yeah, this is such an important shift, Adrian, as you've identified. 5 years ago, it was absolutely not on the radar. This is something that a lot of companies would have said, like, whoa, that's outside the scope here. Like, kind of go figure that out on your own time. But now we've essentially been through a society-wide collective trauma. And while it is certainly true that if we're talking about, extreme mental health issues, which, really do need to be resolved by medical doctors and, trained professionals, it's also true that at sort of this low grade, everyone has been affected over the past couple of years, whether it is workers who have just been feeling lonely because they feel disconnected from their colleagues. Maybe it's, sort of an overall heightened sense of anxiety and being on edge because of the things we've had to deal with, whatever form it takes. And so corporations are having to be more thoughtful about it. The reason being, of course, that if they are not, their employees are either going to walk, which so many of them have done in the Great Resignation, or they're going to be stuck performing at a low level. The truth is, this is probably not something that companies want to have to deal with. I think they probably would like to go back to, we don't want to think about it. But the reality is the scope has broadened about what companies need to be aware of and mindful of and optimizing for. And this is now very much on the table.
Anne, I'm guessing in your organization, like Dorie's talking about, you've got a lot of knowledge workers, you've got a lot of younger, probably employees that are thinking about mental health and wellness in very different ways than Chester or my generation thought about it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting. I'm reflecting on some of Stephane's remarks from a few moments ago where performance management at different points in its journey has been really antagonistic to employee engagement was Stephane's really important point, but also as an extension to that, probably as well employee wellness. And we've all read the articles around psychological safety and the fear trigger that performance conversations can bring, and ineffective conflict management in organizations, and all of those things that performance management has been sort of laden with. And so, as the optimist in me, as someone who studied this for a long, long time and done it well and done it poorly, performance management in this era of mental wellness and mental health, I think has an opportunity to do so much good. At its finest, when it's working well, performance management provides clarity. It provides a sense of purpose. It provides a sense of connectivity, and it provides a sense of community and fellowship when it's done well. When you have those meaningful conversations, when you're clear on each person's contribution and why those contributions matter. To Dorie's point, when it's not necessarily only focused on the superstar performers, but looks at the entire organization and each individual's ability to contribute, I think it can be really additive to overall mental health and mental wellness support that employees can and do increasingly expect from their managers. And I think that it's an opportunity to sort of recast the role that providing clarity, providing feedback, providing support really plays in an organization's success, as well as the health and engagement of its people.
And I love that term you're bringing up, Anne, of that idea of clarity. I've told Chester this before. I live here in Park City, Utah, and 3 sides of me, they run cows. Ranchers run cows. And one of the ranchers was telling me once, he says, the first thing they do when they let cows in a field, he says the cows will walk the entire fence line. Could take them all day, but they're looking for a ways out. And he says, but once they realize there's no way out, they settle down. They're quite happy. Well, we're like that in some ways. We want to know where the boundaries are. I want to know what the rules are. Help me understand with clarity, this is what I can do, what I can't do. And then anxiety is going to come way down for me. So I love that idea, Anne, of clarity. Well, Stephane, what would you add to this discussion of wellness?
I would add that I am glad that finally that pandemic has sort of shed the light on a component. You're right, Dorie, that might not have been traditionally in the scope, but as we know, the previous type of performance management triggered a lot of anxiety, a lot of frustration, and the truth is now when people feel heard throughout the year, they feel cared for. Well, guess what? If they feel that, they will feel valued, they will feel trusted, and to Anne's point, they will bring the most effective of their work every day because they will feel empowered and they will feel at their best. So I think the component of mental health and wellness in the organization is something that we shouldn't underestimate, because for me, it's one of the key elements of the engagement and people bringing the best self to work. That's how now they choose an organization.
It's interesting. Adrian and I, we've got a podcast, Anxiety at Work, and so I'm going to divert off the script here for just a minute. But and Dorie, I'd love for you to chime in. There's this idea that, we go through all this change and whatnot, and it just takes time for that to really adjust. For example, I remember you would never admit you had a drug addiction or alcohol, right? And now, you come into meetings and say, hey, I just got my 10-year chip, and everybody applauds. We were talking to a female executive, and she said, there was a time I remember, and she's older, you would never talk about breast cancer. You just couldn't. Or that you had autism. I've got an executive I coach, and she said, I never told anybody I was divorced for over a year. These subjects were just not talked about. And yet over time, so is it a time thing, Dorie, that we just have to be doing it for a while? When it comes to performance or mental health, we just need to talk about it faster. And how do we speed up that clock, if that's a fair question?
Yeah, it's an important one. And you're exactly right, Chester. I mean, certainly the scope of what has been, considered appropriate to talk about with other people or to share has expanded over time. There were pretty narrow definitional bounds for a very long time. And of course, that silence that was enforced caused a lot of stress on people. And there's a lot of really interesting work done by organizations such as the Deloitte Leadership Center for Inclusion and Professor Kenji Yoshino at NYU talking about the phenomenon of covering, which is where you're sort of not precisely hiding, although it could be hiding, but just trying not to talk about certain things in your life, whether it is a mental health issue, whether it is a medical diagnosis, or you got divorced, or, maybe it's just like downplaying a certain element of your cultural identity so that you're not reminding people somehow that you're Black or Latino or whatever it is. Those are things that studies have shown time and again are actually incredibly stressful for workers because you have to be diverting a fair share of your mental energy to managing that identity rather than performing at your job. And so it's actually really interesting and perhaps counterintuitive to some people that, for instance, other studies done by the Center for Talent Innovation show that out gay employees actually do better. They are promoted faster. They get more money than closeted gay employees. And it's like, well, gee, we live in a world where there's still discrimination. Why would that be? Well, it's because they don't have to carry that psychological weight the way that other people do. It's just like, okay, well, people know now. Now I'll just work. And I think for anyone who is dealing with, their own form of covering, it's something similar.
It's so interesting. For so long, I didn't want to tell anybody I was bald. It just was something you didn't talk about.
So true.
And I'm interested. Any thoughts on that? I saw you nodding, and I'd love, Stephane, for you to chime in a little bit as well.
Well, I just love what Dorie was saying. And one thing I wonder about, and I'd be interested in her professional perspective on this, if the last couple of years really robbed us of the, not in all cases, certainly, but if for many, the effort, the discretionary or necessary effort that it took to cover was no longer available to us because we had so many other emergency pulls on our energy. Mm-hmm. And if because of that, there was almost a resignation, like, this is who I am. I just need to be me because I don't have the energy to build these structures, given that I'm homeschooling children, I'm worried about ailing parents, whatever it might be. These last couple of years have just brought so much, because what I find is that for so many years, we were so partitioned as leaders and as employees, and there seems to be less necessity to sort of fragment or partition ourselves. And I wonder if it's just because a dam broke of sorts, and the ability to do that collectively, to your point, societally, it just diminished so much that now erecting that back, that perhaps there's just no return to those overly hidden and covered points of view. And I recognize that certainly for employees and leaders in marginalized groups or where discrimination is more of a risk for them, that might seem a bit naive of me to offer. So I don't present it as an all or nothing, but I wonder if there's just movement there. And to your point, Dorie, if we can expect more movement towards a holistic view of each other at work, I think some of that is inevitable.
And to build on that, Anne and Dorie, what you said, I think what we have seen certainly with the pandemic is that the pandemic has accelerated some of the existing trends towards more authenticity, towards less covering. And it's not so it's great, and it's not a surprise to see, by the way, that you see more of that out in the organization like we represent with Anne, because I don't know if you saw the survey from NPR in last May that said actually employees are trusting more their employers than the government, than the Supreme Court. So it does put a lot of pressure, of course, on organization, but for the better, I would think, because we are fostering an environment where people can come up to work and be themselves, and then we harness, Dorie, that sort of full energy from an organization standpoint, because they feel safe. They can be themselves where they might not feel safe somewhere else. So I think it has put an accelerator to those trends, and also, and I know we're going to talk about that, but seeing empathetic and authentic leader, that's how you unleash the human magic of the people that are working for you.
This has been such a robust, great discussion that we're going into different areas. And one of the things that I think people will be listening to this, especially the HR professionals, going, okay, so how do I do this? Especially if maybe my performance management system's a little broken. I don't feel like I have the voice to really change it. Let's begin with Anne. What is HR's role in performance management, and what do you do either to get started or if things are a little misaligned right now?
Yeah. So I'm going to start with two pieces of advice from my brilliant colleagues here on this call. The first is Stephane's, and his is about, he said this in a slightly different way, but a key point he made is remember who you're doing this for. Don't forget who your consumer is, who your user is. And your user are employees and managers having thousands, in some cases, tens of thousands of conversations that you are simply not part of. So it's not about us. It's about making sure we're really clear about the users of this work. And the second point that Dorie made that I think is really valuable is build your systems to support a wide array of skillfulness, experiences, comfort with this work. So just from a design perspective, get really, really intentional. Who is this for and how can we design it to be as robust and versatile and hardy, really, as possible? And I think you start there. And then I've got three things that I would have people do. The first is make the processes as simple as possible, but no simpler. So I think we've seen some pendulum swings where the processes got so overwrought, they crushed under their own weight. And then there was this period where we said, never mind, let's just not do it at all, right? That's too simple. So what you want to do is have as simple as possible, but no simpler. The second piece would be it's the Lincoln quote, if I had 6 hours to cut down a tree, I'd spend 5 sharpening my axe, right? So if you've got 100 units of effort to roll out a performance management system, spend 80 of those units on the activation and skill building of your managers and of your employees. That's where the work either works or breaks. And so who cares about the templates? Who cares about the technology if fundamentally employees and leaders don't know what to do with the system and don't feel confident to have tough conversations, to inspire their people, to get to the heart of why there might be confusion on a team, then you haven't won. So, think about Lincoln, spend most of your time on the actual skill building capability and rollout of the work. And then the third, and this is something I also heard Stephane talk about as he mentioned cross-cultural differences. And I think those show up in geographies, which was a specific question that he was addressing, but also functions, experience levels, generations, what have you. And so as you're designing your process, again, remember who your users are and bring them in. A co-design for something like this is so important. This should not be HR's will being, imposed upon others. You've got to really share that agency, and the designers should be a representative of the users. And I think sometimes we miss that part too.
Absolutely. Love that idea of getting the voices of the people who are affected involved with this. By the way, Anne is in Minnesota. Stephane, you're in Manhattan. You're not chopping down a lot of trees in Manhattan, my guess is. So give us the analogy that L'Oreal would bring to this idea of, how do we get HR involved or more involved in this process?
I would build on what Anne said. And so I would say two things. The first one, I would build on what Anne said about this is not about HR redesigning a process. It is about creating a frame for managers to be the coach and for employees to drive their own performance. One. Second, I would, you should think about making it an annual communication process throughout, as opposed to one specific timely event. So make it very seamless, and those ongoing conversations will yield the best of people. Those would be my two parting advice.
Well, and I like this idea too, Dorie, of bringing the coach, the manager versus the coach. You're probably seeing a little bit more where maybe your clients are saying, how do I get my leaders to be more coach oriented? And it's a big leap for some people, isn't it? But what do you recommend there?
It is a big leap for some people. I think in some ways, it's one of these things that it often feels like a big leap, but it also can be an instant conceptual shift. And hopefully behavior can follow from that. Because ultimately, the manager, as it's been set up sort of historically and in the popular imagination, is the judge, is the taskmaster, the supervisor, all of these things. Whereas a coach fundamentally is on your side, is on your team. I think there's a lot of power in the metaphor that goes into it. And think, going to the point that Anne and Stephane have both made about the sort of fear, the understandable fear that, having judgment rendered on you can create in terms of typical the way that performance evaluations have been done in the past. I mean, of course that would freak people out because it was this sort of scary high stakes. Oh God, they're gonna find out about me and they're gonna tell me all the things I'm doing wrong. Who wouldn't dislike that? But if we can actually just shift it over mentally so that, this is the biggest thing. This is true in sales. This is true in almost every element of business operations. If you get weird about something, the other person's going to get weird because you know what? You've made it weird. And so if we can actually, as managers, if you are a manager, if you are a leader, if we can make it not weird by just being like, hey, Adrian, the next time you do blah, 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 try to do it this way. I really liked that you did ABC, but next time it could be even better if you do X. Like, that's not weird. That's like, oh, okay, Dorie, I'll try that. And that's because I haven't made it weird. But whenever it's like, Adrian, we really need to talk. Well, I mean, that's like,
Yeah.
So it's in some ways it's hard, but in some ways it's just flipping a switch.
I want to see an HR manual when it says to executives, this is how you coach people up. And it just in big bold letters, don't make it weird. Don't make it weird. You'll be doing great. I wanted to come back really quick to one thing that Stephane said. He said, releasing the human magic. Isn't that just a great way to look at your people? We're going to put these performance things in place. We're going to hear your voice because we want, your experience to be magical. Like who doesn't want that? So Stephane, I want to, put on your future glasses here. Obviously the pandemic, along with all the other stuff, we tend to focus on the pandemic, but boy, the hits just kept coming, right? We learned a lot about performance management or how it affected performance management. What are some of the key learnings through this, upheaval that you think we're going to take forward and that will be lasting as we look at judging performance and getting our people and releasing that human magic?
So I think what certainly we have learned at L'Oréal, and I think what people and companies are learning as well, is that and I talk very often about the Great Awakening. I think that pandemic has certainly reset a number of priorities for our people. And I know, some companies have seen the effect of the Great Resignation. For me, the best antidote to the Great Resignation is the Great Awakening. And the Great Awakening in the sense that it has to be a wake-up call for organization to pay attention to the wellness and the well-being of their employees, to hear them, to listen to them and to hear them in a different way, and engage them in a more collaborative and partnership way that it was done in the past. Through different type of leadership, we touched upon it. We talked about being more empathetic. Having a leader who cares goes a long way because you build that notion of trust and also the employee being valued. So I think for me, this is one of the silver lining of the pandemic that I'm very happy to see because, and I think it was Anne or Dorie, I can't remember at the beginning, who said some of the best managers who were doing that work before didn't get the benefit of being a great manager. The mediocre manager could go by, not anymore.
Yeah. Can you teach leaders to be empathetic? I mean, can you teach people to be more caring, Stephane?
I think you absolutely can. I do believe that people learned what to do and how to do it. And this is something that makes a difference. Yet, if it's not being authentic, consistently done on an authentic way, it's not going to stick for long.
Yeah. Really well said. So Dorie, what are a couple of things that you're seeing that, because there's a lot of stuff that we changed during the pandemic that we're not keeping, right? Well, what are some of the things that you're seeing that, yeah, this is rock solid. We'll be doing this 10 years from now.
Yes, I think we're certainly figuring a lot of these things out, but certainly what most people have discovered is with regard to remote work and things like that. I mean, obviously, it often does take some kind of emergency to cause people to do things in a different way. Otherwise, you get incremental growth over time. Okay, 1%, 2%, 3%. But, all of a sudden we had everybody sort of suddenly understanding, oh, this is feasible, this can work. And I think similar to the point that Anne was making actually about covering, it's interesting because many people might not have actually chosen to uncover because it felt too risky to do so, but it was only when they were at the sort of breaking point of their psychological load that they're just like, oh, forget it. And then they gave it up, and they're like, oh, I guess the world didn't really end. So, okay. So once you have seen evidence with your own eyes that a thing can work and that, life goes on, then you will probably persist with that. But I think that, there often is that barrier because we imagine, dire consequences. So certainly the great uncovering is one element where I think that probably will stick because, who wants to go back to expending psychological energy on things they didn't even really want to be expending them on? I think that's one thing that'll stick. And then certainly we're seeing just by people voting with their feet that maybe they'll go into the office a little bit, but mostly they prefer not to. And I think that what that means is we need to understand that when people are gathering in offices, and obviously we're not talking about people who work in like retail stores or whatever, but if we're talking about knowledge workers, we have to understand that it becomes a special thing. We have to think about it and treat it like a special thing when everyone is gathering. And think about the import of that. How do we make it be worth people's time and effort? Because if they pick up on the fact that it's not, they're just going to check out even more.
It's so interesting you bring that up, and so many different factors, right? We do some work with a tech company down in Virginia, and of course the pandemic. All of a sudden, everybody was remote, and they just invested all this money in this beautiful new headquarters, right? So the pandemic starts to wane, and the CEO and founder says, well, I want everybody back in the office. And the HR people said, we just had our best year ever. And there was nobody in the office. Why do you want people back? And they said, well, because it came down to, I just spent $1 gazillion on this new building and I want people in the building, So isn't it funny how that comes to play? And what are you saying? What are a couple of things that are going to stick, do you think?
I agree with Dorie, of course. I also think that the point you just made is a really important one. This idea that we will have to start thinking about cultural identity outside of place. I think for so long, organizations have been able to use the physical structures of the workplace as the primary vehicle to signal culture. And to Dorie's point, in some cases, that's still going to be very, very real and present. So you think about frontline workers in all sorts of industries. And yet we know that while that will be a necessary component, it will no longer be sufficient or comprehensive enough to really create that culture or that connection, that affinity. And so then the question becomes, well, okay, fine. What do we use instead? And I think you get really quickly aligned on it's got to be purpose, it's got to be values, it's got to be mission. And we can no longer say, well, we've got free coffee or lunch here is great. It's not going to be enough. And I think that, back to this, like, shedding of covering, shedding of partitioning. We've talked about this as workers, but I also think organizations are going to have to be that much more transparent and authentic, to Stephane's remarks, about who they are, what their values are, what their purpose is, how they serve in our world, because it will be an increasingly important part of their currency to attract really great talent.
Yeah, well said, Anne. And everybody, this has been such a great discussion. We have maybe just about 5 minutes left, so I want to ask the last question here. And Dorie, I want you to kick us off with this. A lot of your work's been around personal branding. And so the HR people watching today, I want you to, as you're coaching them right now, what would you recommend? How do they reinvent themselves with all that we've learned over the last few years in this new world? And as it associates to performance management, what are your recommendations?
Well, this is actually a really useful and important time for HR folks and talent development folks to be able to brand themselves. I mean, this is actually the moment that I would say that HR world, you are in the catbird seat here. This is a big deal because historically we know that HR has sometimes super unfairly been marginalized because it's not a profit center. And so anything that is not a profit center just, kind of gets swept away. Meanwhile, the company would be overlooking the enormous value that HR professionals provide. This is the moment, however, where you can seize the narrative back because we have a couple of really crucial things that are happening because of the Great Resignation, because everyone is aware of it, because, leadership at the highest levels of every organization is paranoid about it. It's hard to recruit talent. People are leaving. And then there's this sort of existential question about culture. How do we sustain it? How do we keep people? How do we recruit the right talent? How do we keep people from leaving? This is the moment where you can really be inserting yourself firmly into this dialogue. It is easy for uninformed or kind of, lazy people in the corporate world to be like, oh, HR, they're just the people that handle benefits packages. It's so ridiculous, right? You are way, way, way more than that. But now this is the place where the central issue that businesses are facing for the next year to 2 to 3 years, depending how long this goes on, you are at the core of it. And so if you could place yourself in the center of the dialogue, if you are creating content, sharing ideas, and really taking an active role in leading the conversation about what is our culture, how do we retain people, how do we bring them on and make our company a player, you really prove the invaluable nature of who you are and what you're doing.
Dorie, I wish you'd just get excited about something. I mean, if you could just grab onto something, Dorie, come on. Love that.
I was looking for a copy of your book. I was going to hold it, Reinvent You. If you haven't got that book, it's available on Amazon. And
don't you worry, Chester. Here we go.
That's awesome. That's so great, Dorie. Stephane, what are your thoughts on this last idea of personal branding for anybody in HR? What do we do at this point?
I think, certainly at L'Oréal, we've been very fortunate because HR has always been at the forefront of the organization and people at the heart of everything we do. But I would say for the HR professionals, it is your moment. Lead with data, great storytelling, and this is the time to push your any activities and any innovation, any initiative that will push the employee engagement.
Love that. That's so great. And Anne, last word is yours.
So then it would be courage. I think that there's a huge opportunity for HR professionals to find courage in this time and to be bold in the work that they're designing because the opportunity is right for it.
Wonderful. Well, listen, we can't thank the three of you enough for your wonderful time and for our wonderful sponsor, Vantage Circle. If you've been watching the scroll at the bottom, you can get HR credit. They've got a wonderful AIR calculator that helps you with your employee recognition programs. And of course, past recordings of our other three panels that we've had. We really can't thank Vantage Circle enough for bringing these really important topics to the forefront, and of course the wonderful expertise. So, if you haven't got a Dorie Clark book, go buy one right now because they're amazing. If you haven't got L'Oréal in your bathroom and in your L'Oréal world class, and of course, Anne, what would I say about Bumble? If you haven't got Bumble in your life,
boyfriend or a girlfriend,
exactly. We help people find love.
There you go. If you don't have love in your life, go to Bumble. Absolutely. Well, listen, thanks again. Adrian, as always, I will give you the last word.
Well, thanks, everybody. Of course, thanks to Anne, to Stephane, to Dorie for bringing your expertise, and everybody for joining us today. We wish you the best of luck as you build more effective performance management and take care of those souls that are in your care. So thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Take care. See you again soon, next month.